was a lazy day. We were deciding that we weren't going to go anywhere. We were actually going to watch a couple of movies.
My boyfriend said, oh shit, there's a cop coming to the door. So we thought, are we really going to have to leave?
And then in the middle of the movie, we get the shelter in place. And then it wasn't too far after that we're all getting the evacuation notice.
And I looked and I'm telling my husband, I said, look at this. And it was talking about a biohazard in Rockdale County. And
by the time I looked out, it was like a huge plume.
You see this big plume is coming towards our direction of our house.
And he was already at the mailbox with a gas mask on. Like, he didn't stay at the door until I answered. And he just yelled, you need to evacuate.
Rockdale County 911, how can I help you?
We got a push ahead bus at BioLab.
Which where?
Plant 12. I'm sorry. Plant 12. I'm out of breath. I'm sorry.
It starts with a popping sound. A BioLab employee calls 911 just after 5 a.m. on Sunday, September 29, 2024. There's no fire yet, but the situation escalates quickly.
Where's the other person that's there with you?
I got to go and get him.
Okay.
He's my partner. He on the inside.
By sunrise, the fire breaks through the roof of Plant 12. And what happens next throws a quiet suburb east of Atlanta into chaos.
You said it's a fire at BioLab?
Fire is now forcing residents living in Conyers to evacuate. Check out this.
Conyers, Georgia is one of the many bedroom communities surrounding Atlanta, part of the largest metro area in the southeastern United States. Conyers sits in Rockdale County, a majority-minority county where 63% of residents are Black. Interstate 20 runs right through Conyers. That road has long been a racial dividing line with whiter, wealthier suburbs to the north and Black families to the south. And sitting just off I-20, the BioLab plant. Over the years, I'd driven past the BioLab plant more times than I can count. An unremarkable brick industrial building with blue lettering. I'd never thought much about it or what was inside. I've spent months poring over documents, filing records requests, speaking with experts, and listening to residents whose lives were upended by the fire. In this podcast, you'll hear 911 calls from the day of the fire, firsthand accounts of those affected, and my efforts to get answers from BioLab. Because this wasn't just an accident. It wasn't just a bad day for one company. It was part of a pattern, one that had played out in communities like Conyers for years, a pattern of industrial risks and regulatory gaps that left residents vulnerable. For the people who live here, this fire wasn't just about one Saturday in September. It was about all the days leading up to it and about what happens next. I'm Pamela Kirkland, and this is Manufacturing Danger, the BioLab Story. What was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday morning in Conyers turned into something else entirely. At first, whatever kind of reaction that was happening inside the lab seemed manageable.
You said it's a fire at BioLab?
Well, it's at Plant 12. Whatever's happening is at Plant 12. One of the workers called and said there was chemical smoke in the building, and apparently there's heavy smoke in the area, so they're shutting everything down.
These are the 911 calls made from BioLab that day. Plant 12 is massive, nearly the size of 5 football fields, a bulk storage warehouse filled with millions of pounds of raw materials for pool and spa chemicals. Inside the plant, 2 BioLab employees spotted a dangerous problem. A chemical that is supposed to stay dry has gotten wet. That's a big red flag because when chlorine-based chemicals mix with water, the reaction can be fast and violent. Thinking they could contain it, they tried opening the loading dock doors to isolate the product.
I want you guys to come out of the building and let the fire department handle getting the dock doors open, okay?
Okay.
But it was already too late. BioLab had recently started something called a fire watch. It was exactly what it sounds like. Employees were paid to keep an eye on the chemicals and call 911 if something went wrong. They started it a few months earlier after strong chlorine odors were reported near some of their storage sites. The system was simple. See something, say something.
And you said it burst open?
The sprinkler head burst. It's smoking everywhere. It's the chemical smoke everywhere.
According to the U.S. Chemical Safety Board, 12 million pounds of those chlorine-based chemicals meant to be stored dry were being doused. Pamela Kirkland is a chemistry professor at Georgia Tech. She says on their own, the chemicals are solid and relatively stable. But when they come into contact with water, that's when the danger begins.
The problem comes when they react with water, because they have this violent reaction with water. The reaction can get out of control and release much more dangerous chemicals such as chlorine or HCl or bromine and oxide of nitrogens, various amounts and compounds.
And she says that's what appears to have happened. A chemical reaction set off by water tore through the building, sending a plume of toxic smoke into the sky over Conyers and beyond. Even in Atlanta, more than 20 miles away, people were warned about the plume and the chlorine smell in the city. Anyone in the way was at risk of being exposed to toxic chlorine gas and even explosive nitrogen trichloride.
Welcome to 11 on Live News at 6. I'm Ron Jones. We're going to begin tonight with breaking news out of Rockdale County. A major chemical fire has now forced residents living in Conyers to evacuate. Check out this, a huge plume of smoke, as you can see. This is all taking place at a BioLab facility on Old
Jean Sadler grew up right here in Conyers. Jean raised her family here, and she loves this community. I met her at a protest a few weeks after the fire.
That's fine with me. I'm ready to tell it.
So what is your name and how long have you lived in Conyers?
I've been in Conyers 52 years, but I've lived where I live for over 15 years, right there off of 3rd Avenue, 2 minutes from BioLab, but no one has contacted us. And this lady just remodeled her house, just had it painted this summer. She had everything done to her house, restored, painted, and now it's got to be done over.
That lady is Jean's neighbor, Barbara Baker. We'll hear from her in just a minute. People take pride in their homes here. Rockdale County is one of the few places left in metro Atlanta where you can still get a good amount of land and a nice house without spending a fortune. It's also one of the few places where Black homeownership is thriving. About 53% of Black households own their own homes in the metro area. In Rockdale County, that number is closer to 60%. For many here, their home isn't just where they live. For people like Jean, their home is their biggest investment. But now...
My fruit tree is gone. Our pecan trees... I can't eat the pecans this year at Thanksgiving off of those trees. They're already dead. So, yes, it has impacted us greatly.
When the knock came at her door the morning of the fire, she thought evacuation would be temporary.
And that Sunday, 7 o'clock in the morning, they're banging on our door. You got to evacuate. What? You got to get out. It's a fire. So we're thinking, oh, okay, they'll have it under control by 5 o'clock, so we go to the church and we sat at the church for all those hours. So finally we realized we can't go home. So we go to our daughters. But who want to do that?
17,000 people, including Jean and her husband, were under mandatory evacuation orders. Around noon that day, a second fire had started. This time, the smoke was different. Barbara Baker saw the eerie cloud.
It was red, pink, chocolate, black, and so with all that being said, we know it's poison.
Another 90,000 people east of Atlanta were told to shelter in place. Interstate 20, a major artery into and out of Atlanta, was shut down for 19 hours. Schools in Rockdale County were forced to go virtual for 3 weeks. Parts of the BioLab building where the initial reaction happened collapsed during the fire, and ultimately, that building was destroyed. Marion McDaniel, the Rockdale County fire chief at the time, said the fire was extinguished by 4 p.m. Sunday afternoon with no injuries at the site.
The fire reignited around 12 noon. For the past 2 or 3 hours, we've been battling that fire to where we now have it out.
But it turns out Jean Sadler did not evacuate, at least not immediately. She said the crisis didn't feel over or even look over from 3 miles away.
You could literally see the fire from Parker Road on that Sunday, because I was over there videoing. I got the video. I got the pictures showing that I'm standing on the bridge and I can see the fire coming out of the smoke at BioLab that Sunday. And they were saying, it's under control. No, it wasn't, because this was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
The chemical continued to off-gas, which just means chemical reactions were still happening. The immediate danger was clear: toxic smoke prompting evacuations and emergency response. But what about the days, weeks, even months after? When chlorine gas is released, it doesn't just vanish. It reacts quickly in the air, but what it leaves behind can last much longer. Byproducts of chlorine exposure can settle in soil, water, and even the body. Short-term exposure can cause burning eyes, coughing, dizziness. But if there was long-term exposure, there was real uncertainty around what that might mean.
This is all taking place at a BioLab facility on Old Covington Highway.
The cause of the fire was still unknown. In fact, we still don't know exactly where the water came from that started the chemical reaction. In the immediate aftermath, they thought it was the building's sprinkler system.
And officials think a sprinkler malfunction around 5 o'clock this morning mixed with something called a water-reactive chemical, which then sparked the fire. At first, crews thought...
Remember, the employee who called 911 said the same thing.
The sprinkler head burst. It's smoking everywhere. It's, the chemical smoke everywhere.
But there was another possibility. Just days earlier, Hurricane Helene had swept through the southeast.
Governor Brian Kemp gave an update on storm damage earlier today, just hours after Hurricane Helene passed through Georgia. It entered the state as a Category 2 hurricane and weakened to a tropical storm. GPB's Sarah Callis reports.
Kemp says 11 people in Georgia have died from the storm, including one who was a first responder.
Metro Atlanta was mostly spared, but could it have been a leak in the roof? Some water that pooled onto the floor?
Residents of Atlanta breathed a sigh of relief as the storm proved weaker than expected in the capital city. Still, firefighters there rescued about 20 people overnight from cars or apartments imperiled by swiftly rising floodwaters. That's according to the city's mayor, Andre Dickens.
In fact, reporters put that question to Georgia Governor Brian Kemp a few days after the fire.
The fire coming a short time after the storm came through. Is there any indication that high winds may have damaged the facility before those, before the fire happened? I mean, is there any indication that those events are?
Well, I mean, I certainly have not heard that, but I don't know.
I would just refer to Rockdale. They're investigating.
They got no real answer. Cheryl Garcia was asking her own questions too.
Nice to meet you. Same here. I'm Cheryl. Have a seat right there. Thank you. All my junk. All right. Thank you so much for having me. Shoes on. No. You sure?
I met Cheryl at her home.
It's a beautiful neighborhood.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Her house is bright and airy. It's just a few weeks before Christmas, and the neighborhood is hanging wreaths at the entrance to the subdivision. There's a small pond in the back and a garden on the side of her house. But the real prize in her yard is her persimmon tree.
Now, this tree was absolutely
full, some of the branches broke.
Oh, wow.
That's how heavy. We had well over 300 pieces of fruit. They taste between a mango and a peach. And we like to eat them when they're crunchy. And it's like the best dessert in the world. They're just so sweet.
Now, this tree was the talk of Cheryl's church. She'd bring bags of fruit to share during the holidays. But after the fire, she didn't know if it was safe to eat anything from her garden. So she called the EPA.
So we have a beautiful persimmon tree and vegetable garden ready to be harvested, winter vegetables, etc. And I asked, can we eat the fruit? Can we, And the answer was, I was told to contact the UGA Cooperative Extension. And they said, yes, you can wash the fruit and then eat it. But a flyer came out from the Georgia Department of Agriculture saying, no. So again, we need some coordination between the two.
Cheryl wasn't just worried about the fruit. She was worried about what was in the soil, in the air, in the water. Because even though she never got an emergency alert and her home was outside the evacuation zone.
So we smelled the chlorine. We saw large plumes of smoke over our house. And then later on, sometime after the 12 o'clock fire, then they announced that, there's a chemical fire and you need to shelter in place.
So Cheryl became an activist, which she never planned to be. She moved to Conyers 16 years ago, looking for peace and quiet and a lower cost of living after years on the West Coast. She and her husband built a life here, a beautiful home with a fruit garden, and found community.
Yeah, this is my lawsuit. This is my lawsuit file. And so pulmonary office visit. It turns out the doctor and I are both from the same. Yep, see, she was doing fine until the Conyers chemical fire. So they have clearly documented exposure to potentially hazardous chemicals. That was my love, Dr. Johnson, my husband's primary care dog.
Cheryl spent weeks filing open records requests, trying to make sense of what happened.
I'm trying to get that across to them, that just some of the chemicals that I researched in my own medical books, it's bad. It's very bad. And the long-term effects is what people don't know. The cancers, the reproductive toxicity.
She knows what she's talking about. Her background is in occupational health, and she spent years studying chemical exposure risks. And after the BioLab fire, she didn't just want to know what had burned. Short term, she knew what some of the effects might be. But long term? So she pressed for more answers.
I contacted Rockdale Water Resources, the director's Kimbry Peak. I said, I understand from the press conference that you were testing the water 3 times a day. I want those reports. So he sent me a report daily, like just once a day. I said, that's not what I asked you for. Stop playing. I want 3 times a day. And sure enough, he finally sent it.
Cheryl pulled fire inspection reports, property records, emails from the Rockdale County Development Authority, the fire department, emergency management, the county soil and water conservation district, any agency that might have answers. But she said sometimes it was like running in circles.
I don't know what to believe anymore. It's tough. I just know what I see and what I'm feeling. It's a problem.
Yeah. She wasn't alone. I had been filing some of these same requests, looking for information about BioLab, the county's response, the company's history, and hitting roadblocks. What we both found was confusion at every level. Emails between departments that I reviewed made one thing clear. Even officials weren't always aligned on the facts. They weren't sure if the fire was actually still burning after it had been extinguished, or if the smoke from the off-gassing was still releasing chemicals into the air. Even after the fire department said the flames were out, some materials continued to smolder. Here's Marion McDaniel, the fire chief again.
As you see behind me, what you're seeing is still that chemical reaction from that water reactive chemical product. And once we can get it out, it was still off gas. But once again, the fire is out, and that is the status of where we are right now.
But was it? I had Conyers residents telling me for days, even weeks later, that they thought something was still on fire. Even after officials declared the fire extinguished, there was still uncertainty. Should people still shelter in place? Had it ever been safe to breathe the air? The messaging was inconsistent. Emails between officials show a struggle to figure out how to talk about the smoke. They debated calling it soot when it was likely a combination of chemicals and water vapor. And while the air monitoring results showed that at times chemical levels were within safe limits, people could still smell chlorine.
I don't trust it. The air quality, I don't believe is still safe for any of us to be breathing.
And that raised a big question. How do you convince people they're safe when they can still smell chlorine in the air? That's where the Environmental Protection Agency's air monitoring efforts come in.
So EPA has been conducting air monitoring within the community since the fire began, since early Sunday morning. As operations,
the EPA deployed mobile air monitoring stations, equipment that could be moved as needed to track chemicals in real time. They were measuring for a range of specific chemicals that could be released from the fire: volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, carbon monoxide, hydrogen sulfide, oxygen, chlorine, hydrogen chloride, and phosgene. For Cheryl, the EPA results gave her pause. And then the EPA did something that stunned her.
Why would you turn over the rest of testing to the poisoner? Why would you do that?
After Rockdale County declared the state of emergency over, the EPA handed air monitoring duties back to the very company responsible for making residents doubt the air, BioLab. The company says it worked closely with local, state, and federal officials in response to the fire, and that air monitoring showed no sustained action level exceedances in the community for over 15 days. But there were independent air testers, too.
I got an email from the city manager in Conyers a day later asking us for help.
Researcher Greg Huey and his Georgia Tech team say they found chlorine, just like the EPA. But they found something else, too.
I expected to see just basically pure chlorine at night. You won't see it during the day since it photolyzes so fast in the atmosphere.
Sunlight breaks down chlorine gas, which is why the county would give shelter-in-place orders overnight. That's when chlorine danger was highest. But what Huey did see...
But what we saw instead was we saw very high levels of bromine initially, and we started seeing organic compounds as well that were coming out of the plume.
Other unexpected chemicals that hadn't been fully studied in an event like this before. Bromine causes irritation and respiratory issues.
Isocyanic acid, which generally you only see in cigarette smoke or something like a forest fire. We also saw a compound, cyanamide, that I have no idea that if it's ever been seen in the atmosphere before.
Was any of this at dangerous levels to breathe? Greg Huey isn't sure. His team is still analyzing their data, but one thing is already clear. The impact of this fire spread much farther than Conyers.
Level, but we saw very high levels 21 miles away from the incident, which means obviously that they have to be higher in the Conyers area.
So what had people in Conyers been breathing? People were hospitalized after the fire. What they want to know is whether BioLab put them there. Anecdotally, everyone I spoke with suffered with at least some irritation. Burning eyes, sore throats, headaches.
It was just a persistent, low-level, dull headache, and a fever. I've had a fever ever since.
But tracking the health impact, that's harder. Lynn Paxton, the interim health director at the time, said weeks later she wasn't aware of any hospitalizations.
To my knowledge, no one has needed to be hospitalized for this, and I do not believe that there were even that many visits to the emergency room. But again, I'm not in possession of the full data set right now.
We were able to get that data set. According to a Georgia Department of Health report on the effects of the BioLab fire, at least 1,000 people sought care at hospitals or urgent care centers for symptoms public health says could be related to the accident. DPH investigated just under half of those cases. 77% were Black patients. We reached out to BioLab for comment on their response to the fire and its long-term impact. They declined an interview, but directed us to their community resource website, where they outline their safety efforts, community assistance programs, and ongoing air monitoring.
Shut down BioLab! Shut down BioLab! Shut down BioLab! Shut down BioLab!
Walking along with Jean Sadler, who's been here for 50 years. She says she worries the wealth she's built through owning homes here has been all but wiped out. She just wants to be made whole.
If they're allowed to stay, they need to buy us out. They can have the house. They can have the land because it's no good. My fruit tree, I just did preserves. I can't do them no more.
They need to buy us out.
They need to buy us out. Give us, our houses are paid for. Give us enough money to move someplace else, and they can have it.
Kamisha Brown, a Conyers resident for over 20 years, joined the protest weeks after with her family. For her, the damage wasn't just financial, it was personal. The fire left people wondering what long-term exposure might mean for their health.
Because I've been having health issues, my blood pressure skyrocketed to 200 over 100. Nobody has came out to the community to see about us. I live 2 miles away. It blew up. The plume came in my yard. I've had it tested, but I've been experiencing health issues.
Brown is among the people here who are scared for their health. But unlike Jean, she doesn't want to leave. She says it's time for BioLab to go.
So hopefully with everybody protesting this time that they will shut it down. I've been here over 20 years because I was here when the first one.
The first one, she says. But how many other times has this happened? Listen to this call from the 911 dispatcher to first responders the morning of the fire.
One of the workers called and said there was chemical smoke in the building, and apparently there's heavy smoke in the area, so they're shutting everything down.
Oh, fun. All right.
It's always BioLab, right?
Yeah, literally. All right.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Fire Lab, they called it.
It's always BioLab, right?
A nickname earned because to first responders, this was not a new emergency. It was routine. Just another call about another fire at BioLab. Because BioLab had burned before, and yet it happened again. On the next episode of Manufacturing Danger.
This isn't the first time that BioLab has impacted people in Rockdale.
2004, our sons was living in the house. It impacted them. They had to evacuate.
My aunt, who lived in Conyers, was a part of the first explosion in 2004. Here I am experiencing this again.
The BioLab fire in 2024 wasn't the first. In fact, fires and industrial accidents at that plant stretch back decades. Next time, we go back, 20 years back, to the fire that started it all. Manufacturing Danger, the BioLab Story, is a production of Georgia Public Broadcasting. This podcast was written by me, Pamela Kirkland. Grant Blankenship is our senior editor. GPB's podcast team includes Sandy Malcolm, Jeremy Powell, Jake Cook, and Mark Davenport. For more, visit gpb.org/podcasts.